First, I have no bad news, no tragedy, no sudden tragic turn to give you, nothing that represents me needing to talk about what I'm going to talk about. In fact, the reason there isn't is exactly why I'm talking to you about it. One of the things people notice when they deal with me on a day-to-day basis is that I'm really into contingencies. I'm really into running scenarios and trying to figure out potentials for problems, issues, and ultimately, if you want to summarize it, preparing for the worst. So let me share a few thoughts about a life lived in contingency. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It, a podcast about technology, history, and getting myself out of debt. Thanks to Daniel Boyd, Jeff Atwood, and the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. I could tell you that I don't know when this started, but I know when it started. It started when my parents were getting divorced and my mother bundled up her children and drove away. So when I'm feeling dramatic, I can say that I was a child abduction, technically a parental abduction during a divorce case. But there was one aspect to it that still struck me at the time and which really opened my mind to possibilities that I hadn't thought of up to then. Like many people, I lived a rather idyllic childhood, one of neighborhood yards and meeting different friends and getting along with some and not getting along with others, visiting, being visited, the life of somebody who understood his neighborhood and not much else of the world. When my mother came to her children and told us it was time to go, we had to go. We needed, and this phrase still rings true for me almost 50 years later, to take what we needed. That's a very strange phrase to use with a child. I was about 9 years old, and the idea of only taking what I needed was a foreign concept to me. I had a place in the world, and it was filled with two parents, and it would always be there, and I could venture out into the world, but I could always return to where these things were, and it would be handled. That was eroded away in a phrase. This isn't new information. I've talked about it before, but it also set me off on a path of thinking that never changed again, which was nothing is firm, nothing is dependable. Relying on outside forces or outside people was sometimes necessary, but extremely risky and not to be done unless cornered. I can feel the echoes of this over and over in my life. I wasn't using valet parking until my 30s. I didn't like storage units until my late 30s. I would be hesitant to leave where I lived alone, by itself, with no way to know, no way to depend on if it would be there when I came back. That lack of a foundation, of being unable to look at what you have and depend on it, meant that when I used computer bulletin board systems, instead of thinking of them as these wonderful places, and perhaps naively that they would be there forever, my first thought was, I need to grab everything because it won't be here soon. And by soon, I mean after this phone call. I didn't trust that any computer bulletin board would exist beyond my call. Instead, I would download everything I could, mementos of what was there, put them away, store them. In the case of those particular items, we weren't talking about a large physical presence, maybe a stack of floppy disks, a little pile of printouts. We weren't talking about twist ties and garbage bags and old laundry. I was keeping my hoarding very specific, keeping pieces of what I thought would be history, or would be something I'd want to experience more than once. From that approach came the beginnings of what was textfiles.com, that thought of something disappearing being not just these text artifacts, but the stories of the people behind them set me off on doing documentaries. Many times I walked into a room, talked to a person for an hour, and that's the only evidence of them that still exists on the internet. There are people for whom I was their unwitting oral historian. So that's fine in its own way. Having all of these different materials, that is where I know it came from. I can tell that this trauma caused me to think of the world as transient. And left alone like that, it would merely be a little bit of paranoia and perhaps a quirk of my personality exposing itself every once in a while. But I think it mutated over time. Because more than just feeling like the world was a set of experiences that I would have no control over, or to feel like the world would make its choices and I would have to go along with those choices, I instead rebelled. I started thinking about possibilities, cases where if I couldn't control the narrative, I could, at least within reason, account for its variations. It is perhaps one of those cases where people either find this completely intuitive or utterly baffling. But looking at everything, looking at the whole world as a series of unfortunate possibilities lurking around the corner, and taking sustenance and happiness from how things haven't become terrible yet, could seem like a very corrosive outlook. But like everything, moderation is key. When this part of my personality pops up, when I make arrangements, and a lot of my life is making arrangements, it's a matter of understanding how many things are within my control and how many things aren't. I can be there. I know I can be there wherever there is. But what might be there when I get there might be something different. Perhaps somebody will tell me they're willing and able to give me a donation of historical items. But when I get there, I discover they're not ready yet. Things have changed. Well, I've already made some level of contingency of knowing what's around that location. If what I am doing is going to in some way be canceled, instead of striking my fists against a wall and telling this person perhaps that they are wrong and forcing them into a situation they're not comfortable with, I know that I'm in a certain town that has something I want to see. And so the trip becomes less of one transferring items and becomes one of exploring a region, of being part of something, of finding out what exactly this road goes to, or finding out about the features of something I've only been aware of in text. In other words, that contingency of what should be a specific job becomes something else that I would consider worth my time. Let's expand it out further. You go to an event and you're supposed to be talking, but you don't have your notes. You lost them. You have two choices there. Give up, quit, maybe not go to the conference, maybe claim you're sick, find some way out. But I have other talks I can give. I have other ways I can approach what I am saying. It takes a certain level of comfort of going up to people without the thing you need, but I know that scenario because I've played it out. And I will have put my talk slides on a cloud-based service, and I will have it on a USB stick, and I will also know what those particular subject points are that I want to reach. And I have had cases where there is no slides that I have. There's no preparation. They've told me I have 30 minutes instead of 40 minutes. Maybe they have told me that I'm in a larger room or a smaller room than I was going to talk in, and I have to be able to improvise. That's where this comes from. This idea that everything could change in a moment. Being on the internet I've seen some terrible videos, and without going into details, it's quite clear that the moments of serenity that are broken up by unexpected events are quick. And it is very hard, incredibly hard, to train yourself to break out of them. I remember being at a party and somebody fainted, and there was a moment when everyone was paralyzed. They didn't know what to do with a fainted person, and I ran over. And the person was fine, but I think about that I jumped over to get their feet elevated and their head cushioned and to find out how they were doing and take their pulse and make sure they were okay. Where did that come from? And where it came from was that awareness that if I didn't move, if I became passive, nothing was going to change, and it could get worse very quickly. It's not hard for contingency planning to come off as paranoia, to walk into a room and see where the exits are, to try to figure out if everybody is acting normal or if there's anybody you need to keep an eye on, or being out on the street and deciding not to take a subway car because it gives you a bad feeling. These are valid feelings, but if they take over your life and everything becomes that, if you let it wash over you as the way that you live, then sure, granted, I will tell you that is no way to live. But having an ambient awareness of the world in both transactions, presentations, conversations, and your own living, that's a healthy process. I've dealt with people who have felt themselves absolutely in a vice grip because they expected steps 1, 2, and 3, and then step 2 isn't going to happen. They are literally held at a standstill because they think of the world as a flowchart, going from one item to another item to another item. But life isn't a flowchart. Life is a series of interrelated actions happening, a range of forces and personalities all moving around each other with their own motivations, their own schedules, and their own unforeseen circumstances that are changing everything. In your mind, you know you can walk in this direction, but what if somebody parks a truck there? You expect that it will take you 30 minutes to get from point A to point B, but there's a traffic jam, or your car doesn't start, or the person that you were expecting to be there has called and said they won't. Knowing what you might do in those situations is an exercise. It's lying back and thinking about what matters to you. What is the absolute rock solid thing you need to do to move things from here to there, to be able to get this particular payment or be able to pay this bill, giving it the highest priority, and then tacking on what we often tack on. Maybe I'll do a shopping trip. Maybe I'll visit a friend. Maybe I'll go see a movie. Considering them to be deferrable in the light of the new priority. It also helps to be communicative. It helps to tell people you can't make it, or can they be here or there. And folks in your life who understand this outlook will not consider themselves wronged, but realize that life has variance. Things will happen to them. What I'm saying here is that it's a training of the mind. It is a outlook that can be very cynical, can be very deep. It can be very introspectively sad to constantly understand that nothing is guaranteed, that nothing may happen, and that outside of the realm of justice and fairness, life will do things. Sometimes it will take your parents away. Sometimes it will cause you to not be where you need to be. And sometimes everything you've done to prepare for something will have no use whatsoever. Just a set of scribbled lines and a shared document that means nothing after that moment. But if you look at your life, if you look at the arc of this world we live in, and all of its wonders, and all the other side roads and pieces that are off of the track of the amusement park ride we put ourselves on, I can assure you, from hard-won experience over a life lived, that as long as you understand that there's no sizing up at the end, no grade given to you as a person for the life you lived that you are working towards, I think you'll find living, with all of its possibilities, a little bit less daunting. This is Jason Scott Talks His Way Out of It. Thanks to James Bekoyanu, Ernie Hershey, Michael Rubin, Dilip Reddy, Sean Kelly, Trixie the Cat, Joey Mink, Martin, Symbionts, Benjamin Guts, and Anonymous, along with the hundreds of other supporters on Patreon and elsewhere who have been supporting me and helping me get out of debt. Like I said, nothing has brought me to talk about this. It just occurred to me that when people have said to me, wow, you get things done, the way that I approach it is to get things done, not this thing done. Today might have tasks A through F. Maybe I'll only do C. Maybe I'll only do F. Maybe I'll hit all of them. But also, sometimes life gives you none of them, and you have to find within yourself or within the people you know a way to live a life in which not every day is perfect. And a day that you thought was one of action, accomplishment, and happiness has to be one of preparation, review, and, of course, contingency.